When I walked into my brother's engagement dinner in my dress blues, the entire private room at the back of that steakhouse on King Street went quiet so fast, I heard the kitchen door swing shut somewhere behind me. 40-some firefighters from 3 different halls rose out of their chairs together, and the scrape of all those chairs against hardwood cracked through the room like something breaking. A captain near the bar, a man who'd pulled people out of a collapsing building on the Danforth and never once raised his voice about it, stood up straight and called out, "Captain!" On the floor. Nobody moved for a second. My mother set her wine glass down without drinking from it. My brother's fiancée froze with her hand still resting on the back of her chair. And my brother, the same man who'd texted me 18 hours earlier, telling me not to make the dinner about myself by showing up in uniform, looked at me like he didn't recognize his own sister. I used to think that if this moment ever actually happened, it would feel like winning something. I'd pictured it, on and off, for almost 20 years. The moment my family would finally look at me and understand what I'd actually built. But standing there in the doorway with the bars on my collar catching the restaurant's dim gold light, what I mostly felt was exhausted. My name is Morel Baudouin. I'm 31, and this is the story of the night my 2 lives. The one my family approved of, and the one I actually lived. Finally ended up in the same room. The thing about being the disappointing daughter is that the feeling never really ages out of you. Part of me will always be 14, sitting at my parents' kitchen table in Trois Rivières, watching my dad praise my older brother Etienne for getting an A in business math while I got told to stop showing off because I'd corrected his math on a tip calculation. Etienne was the easy one. Hockey on Saturdays, an actual girlfriend by 16. The kind of easy charm that made aunts pinch his cheeks at Christmas. And me? I was the kid who wanted to talk about how the CN Tower's structural engineering worked instead of what everyone was wearing to the dance. I read library books about fire behavior and building collapse patterns while other girls in my class were reading magazines, and my father, who ran a small accounting practice out of a strip mall for 26 years, believed, quietly but completely, that some lives were meant for some people. Firefighting, he made clear without ever quite saying it outright, was not meant for his daughter. I still remember the night I told them I wanted to apply to the fire academy. My mother was doing dishes. Etienne, 17 at the time, laughed so hard he had to put his glass down. My father folded the newspaper the slow, deliberate way he always did right before saying something he considered final, and told me I'd grow out of it. That was 2013. I was 19, and I had zero intention of growing out of anything. The academy in Hamilton was the first place in my whole life where nobody asked me to be smaller. Nobody cared if I'd smiled enough at a family dinner, or whether I'd make a nice wife for somebody someday. They cared whether I could carry weight up 6 flights of stairs in full gear, whether I could keep my head when a room was filling with smoke, whether I could be trusted not to panic when it mattered. Turns out I could. My family never quite got over that. Over the years, the phone calls got shorter and further apart. I missed Thanksgiving twice because I was on shift and couldn't trade out. My father once introduced me to a new neighbor at a backyard barbecue by saying, "This is our daughter Morel. She's with the fire department." Just that. Like I answered phones there. By that point, I'd been promoted to lieutenant and was running incident command on structure fires across half of Hamilton. I smiled and let it go, because after enough years, you stop expecting the correction to land. Then, 4 days before Etienne's engagement dinner, my phone buzzed while I was sitting in the watch office at the hall, doing paperwork after a slow overnight shift. It was a text from my brother. "Don't show up in your uniform thing on Saturday. This is supposed to be about me and Sabrina, not your job." I read it twice. Outside the window, the November sky over Hamilton was doing that flat gray thing it does for half the year, rain coming down sideways onto the apparatus bay. I didn't feel angry exactly. I felt strangely empty. After 12 years, he still thought what I did for a living was something to keep in the back room. That night, I almost didn't go to the dinner at all. I sat in my apartment in a quiet that felt too big, with a glass of the good scotch I keep. For nights I don't want to think too hard, and I thought about how empty the place felt. No partner. My ex, Daniel, used to say the job came before everything else in my life, including him, and I used to argue with him about it. Sitting there alone, I wasn't sure he'd been wrong. Around 9, my phone rang. It was Theo Nakamura, retired district chief, the man who'd trained me when I was 22 and scared, and trying very hard not to show it. "Tell me you're still going Saturday," he said. "No hello first." I told him I was thinking about skipping it. There was a pause on the line, then, quietly, "Morel, you've spent 12 years showing up for people who never once thanked you for it. Don't start hiding now." I asked him if it actually mattered. "No," he said. "I think you matter." I pulled my dress uniform out of the closet the next morning. Badge polished, collar bars straight, the bugle pin from my promotion still sitting exactly where I'd left it. I ran my hand over the fabric for a second before I put it on. People assume a uniform makes you feel powerful, Sometimes it just reminds you of everything it cost to earn it. By early afternoon, I was driving east from Hamilton toward Trois Rivières with the radio low, the highway stretching out gray and wet through bare November trees. Tim Hortons cups in the cup holder. A gas station stop outside Kingston. The long, flat boredom of the 401, turning into the rolling hills closer to Quebec. The restaurant Etienne had picked for the dinner was a steakhouse downtown with white tablecloths and low lighting. The kind of place my father liked, because it made him feel like he'd arrived somewhere. By the time I got there, the private room was already half full, candles lit, a string quartet recording playing softly over the speakers. And somehow, at 31 years old with bars on my shoulders, I felt like an unwanted teenager walking in late to a family dinner all over again. My mother spotted me first, near the coat check. Colette Baudouin in a navy dress and the little gold cross she's worn since her own confirmation, smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Oh, Mireille," she said, glancing past me toward the door like she was hoping someone hadn't seen. "You actually wore it." "Yes, Mom, I did." She stepped closer, voice dropping. "Tonight is about your brother. Same line, different decade." Before I could answer, my father appeared. Even at 73, Bertrand Baudouin still carried himself with the stiff posture of a man used to being listened to. His eyes landed on the uniform and his jaw set. "Couldn't you give him one night?" I told him quietly. I was just standing there. "You know exactly what you're doing," he muttered. That one landed harder than it should have. Because the truth was, I'd spent my whole adult life trying not to make this family uncomfortable with what I'd become. Changing the subject at holidays. Letting it go when they called it the job. Instead of saying the word. Never once explaining what it actually meant to run into a building other people were running out of. And still, apparently, simply existing in the room was too much. Sabrina, my brother's fiancée, found me a few minutes later. She looked lovely in a green dress, nervous in the particular way people get at their own engagement party. She hugged me, genuinely warm, and then stepped back with that same careful look everyone in my family seemed to specialize in. "Would you maybe think about the jacket?" she asked. "Just for the toasts. People might get the wrong idea." I looked at this kind, anxious young woman who barely knew me and didn't feel angry, just tired. "I earned this," I said. "I know," she said quickly. "I'm not trying to be rude." She wasn't. But the message was the one I'd been hearing my whole life. Take up less space. Don't be the thing people notice. I found a seat at the far end of a long table near the kitchen door, away from the toasts, away from the center of things. I figured that was where I belonged for the night. A young firefighter from one of the downtown halls approached my table about 20 minutes later. Nervous. Maybe 24 years old. In a suit that looked new. He said his uncle had served under me during the apartment fire on Bay Street. 2 winters back. The one where we'd pulled 6 people out through a stairwell that collapsed 40 minutes later. "My family talks about you at every Christmas dinner, Lieutenant," he said quietly. Before I could answer, a retired captain at a nearby table overheard and stood. Then another firefighter stood beside him. Then someone in dress uniform by the bar put a hand over his heart. And then, like something tipping over, every off-duty firefighter in that private room rose to their feet at once. 40-some chairs scraping back across hardwood floor all together. A sound like a single crack of thunder in a room that small. The string quartet recording kept playing for a second into total silence before someone turned it off. I sat there frozen for a moment, genuinely stunned. Then the captain by the bar squared his shoulders and called out, in a voice that only comes from years of giving orders over engine noise, "Captain, on the floor." I stood up slowly. In the quiet that followed, I finally looked over at my parents. My mother had her hand pressed over her mouth. My father stood completely still beside her, face pale under the restaurant's low lighting, like he couldn't reconcile the daughter he'd spent 30 years minimizing with whatever was happening 20 feet in front of him. Captain Ruben Achibi, who I hadn't worked with directly in almost 6 years, since a warehouse fire on the east side that nearly took 2 of our guys, stepped forward. "Permission to speak freely, Captain." "You always did anyway, Ruben." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room, loosening something in the air. What happened over the next 20 minutes, I still don't have great words for. Off-duty crews I'd worked alongside crossed the room to shake my hand. A retired chief introduced me to his niece, who'd just started at the academy in Toronto that fall. A man with a noticeable limp came over. Pierre Lacasse, retired now, and reminded me he was the one I'd sat with in a hospital hallway for 5 hours. The night his son didn't make it home from a call. "Most lieutenants send flowers," he said. "You stayed." "That's what good officers do," I told him. "No," he said, voice rough. "That's what good people do." For a second I couldn't say anything at all, and standing there surrounded by all that earned real respect. The only thing running through my head was how badly I'd always wanted even a fraction of it from my own father. A little after 10, I slipped out a side door toward the small patio behind the restaurant. The noise from inside faded behind glass. The November air was sharp and cold. The kind of cold that smells like the first real edge of winter. Traffic humming somewhere out on King Street. Theo found me out there a few minutes later, 2 coffees in hand from somewhere. Traffic, he said, by way of explanation, even though there was no traffic to speak of. We stood there a while without saying much. Then he asked quietly, "You doing okay?" That question nearly took me apart. "I'm 31, I admitted, and I still wanted my father to look proud of me tonight. That one never really goes away," Theo said. "My own father hugged me exactly once in his life. I remember the date better than my anniversary." I laughed, a little wetly, then footsteps behind us. I turned, expecting another guest. It was Sabrina, still in her green dress, wearing that careful expression people use when they're approaching something they're not sure how to hold. Theo excused himself quietly. Sabrina and I stood at the patio railing a while without talking. Finally, she let out a breath. "I owe you an apology, Mirel. Earlier, asking about the jacket, that was wrong of me. And it wasn't really about the jacket." "I know," I said. She looked out at the parking lot lights. "You want to know something terrible? I used to think your parents preferred Etienne because he was somehow better than you." She shook her head slowly. "But tonight I think the truth is, they never understood you enough to see what you'd actually done." That landed quiet and painful, the way true things usually do. "You were always the brave one in that family," she said. "Easy to say now. I should have figured it out a long time before tonight." She touched my arm gently. "For what it's worth, I've always told people my future sister-in-law is a firefighter. I'm proud of that." Something caught in my throat before I could stop it. My mother came out a few minutes after that, mascara a little smudged, looking smaller than I'd ever really noticed before. She told me she'd kept every newspaper clipping about my promotions in a shoebox at the back of her closet for 12 years. My father didn't know. I just stared at her. "Why?" I asked. She looked down at her hands. "Because I didn't know how to be proud of you out loud without making your father feel like he'd failed somehow." That one sentence explained a decade in about 14 words. My father came last. He stood beside me at the railing, looking out at the parking lot for a long time before he spoke. Then he told me something he'd never told anyone in the family before. His own father had pulled strings to keep him out of a labor dispute back in the 70s that had turned violent at the mill where half the town worked. Men he'd grown up with getting hurt. One of them, a friend named Marc-André Tremblay, badly enough that he never fully recovered. I stood at his retirement party years later. My father said quietly. Everyone calling him tough, calling him a survivor, and all I could think was that should have been me standing where he stood. The pieces of my whole childhood rearranged themselves in about 4 seconds. His coldness about my career, his need to shrink what I'd built. It was never really about me, it was shame, decades of it, buried so deep he'd half forgotten where he'd put it. "When you joined the department," he said slowly, "you went and did the thing I was always too frightened to do myself, and I didn't know how to live next to that." I leaned against the railing and just breathed for a second. "You could have told me, Dad." He looked at me properly. "For maybe the first time all night." "Mirel," he said, voice catching. "I never once stopped being proud of you." The words hit somewhere old and tender in me. "You had a strange way of showing it," I told him. "I know," he said. "I know." The next morning I was packing up my hotel room before sunrise. Old shift work habit. Can't sleep past 5 no matter what. When I came down to the lobby and found my father already there, sitting in one of those stiff armchairs by the front desk, holding a battered shoebox on his lap. Inside were letters. My letters, every one I'd mailed home during my first year at the academy in Hamilton. Some folded and unfolded, so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth. My mother had kept every single one. My father reached in and pulled one out carefully. "There's a line in this one," he said, voice cracking slightly. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since last night." He handed it to me. I recognized my own 19-year-old handwriting right away. He cleared his throat. "You wrote, 'I hope someday Dad will actually be proud of me.'" His eyes were wet. "I was proud the whole time," he said. "I just never figured out how to say it." I looked at my father standing there in the gray early light coming through the hotel lobby windows, and for the first time in my life, I believed him. Sabrina and Etienne came down a few minutes later with coffees from the place across the street, and Etienne hugged me harder than he had in years, told me no more disappearing on shift for months without a word. "I'll try," I told him, and meant it. Driving west out of Trois-Rivières, the city fading slowly in my mirrors, I turned something over in my head that I hadn't been able to put into words in 31 years of living. The proudest moment of my career was never the promotion, never the medal, never the 4-alarm fire we walked away from clean. It was finally understanding I'd never actually needed anyone's permission to know what I was worth. A few hours later, I stopped at a Tim Hortons, just off the highway outside Kingston. A young woman in a community college EMS jacket recognized the patch on my coat and went a little wide-eyed, straightened up, almost saluted, before catching herself and laughing instead. I gave her a small nod back. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, The road ahead felt lighter than the one behind me.